Hello, everybody. Happy July. It's time to talk about what happened in the month of June. If this is your first time here, hi, hello, welcome. My name is Beck Griffin, and this is the Deep Dive Project, which is my venture in independent citizen journalism and research. Every single month, at the beginning of the next, I sit down and I pull the headlines that were delivered to my inbox that are relevant to the research and the topics that I cover on this channel, and we discuss them. I pull these articles from all around the world, from different types of media sources, and I do that very intentionally because I am trying to cast a wide net to gather as much information so that we can create as detailed of a picture as possible about the world that we are living in, the times that we are existing in, and the people and forces that are shaping the conditions that we are existing in. This is a segment that I've really enjoyed doing because it has broadened my viewpoint, my scope on the world. It has helped me feel like I have a better grasp of kind of what is happening globally, and it's given me an appreciation for the fact that despite the fact that we are all landlocked to our specific individual countries, we aren't existing in a vacuum, and the things that are happening right now are happening all over the world to all of us, and it really does feel like we are living through something that is collective and significant. And this newsroom analysis segment is my attempt to create some type of a paper trail to archive what is happening and also to bring you matters that I believe are of public concern. Everything that we're going to be discussing today, you can find linked in a source document down below. I do that for a variety of different reasons. The two most important being so that you can see where I am getting my information from and so that you can access that information and use it to do your own research. My goal here is to equip my audience with information and a desire to know more, because we live in such a unique time in human history where we have access to anything that we want to know practically. If you have access to the internet or a smart device, you have access to every single question and answer that you've ever wanted to know. And I think we really need to use that to our advantage now more than ever, because ignorance is a luxury that we and billions of innocent people simply can no longer afford. Before we get into the particulars today, I want to issue a quick content warning. This goes for everything that I discuss here on the Deep Dive Project. Although I always attempt to approach the topics that I discuss with care and consideration, it is inevitable that we are going to be discussing topics that some may find disturbing and upsetting. So viewer discretion is advised, and please keep your own mental health in mind at all times. As I am pulling up our first article here, I just would like to remind and request that you give this video a thumbs up if you haven't already, and please consider subscribing. Something like 78% plus of my viewers are not even subscribed, so I would really appreciate it if you would take the time to do that. It is totally free. I promise I will not harass you, and it supports the channel and the work that I am trying to do really better than almost anything else. And of course, there are other ways that you can support my work down below in the description of this video if you are interested. With all of that said, let's go ahead and get into the first article that we'll be discussing. I decided to focus the majority of my attention for the month of June on Pope Leo's recent visit to Spain and kind of the conversation and the controversy that that visit stirred up, because it ties into a bunch of different things that I have been talking about here for quite some time. And this first article, which was published on El País, is a perfect place to start. The headline says, "The Vatican addresses the controversy surrounding victims of pedophilia and confirms that the Pope will meet with them in Spain." British journalist Gareth Gore claims he requested a meeting between the Pope and victims of Opus Dei, but was told that a meeting with another group of survivors had already been scheduled. It is an unfortunate fact that the Catholic Church has many different groups of victim survivors. And I can imagine it would be very difficult for one single person to meet with all of those people in a way that feels sincere and authentic. It's just kind of the nature of the beast when you are in charge of an organization that has millions of members. The controversy surrounding whether or not the Pope will meet with victims of pedophilia in the church during his visit to Spain is already casting a shadow over Leo's trip before his arrival this Saturday, and the Vatican has decided to intervene in an unusual way. Now, obviously, as I'm reading this, this visit to Spain has already happened. This happened several weeks ago, so you can go and find continued discussion articles that have come out since that visit. People are continuing to talk about this thing. It has already happened. So I'm speaking about everything surrounding it in the past tense to kind of create this paper trail for you and everything. But I'm aware this visit already has happened. He's already been to Spain and has left and everything else. I still think it's really important to take some time and talk about the situation that was created here, the controversy, the things that people had to say, and the way that the Vatican and the Pope chose to respond, which, as we know, is something you have to pay attention to because these people seem to operate and deliver their messages through symbol and metaphor more than by direct plain English or plain language termed means. Anyway, I continue. In a brief statement released at 9 p.m. this Friday, the director of the Holy See press office, Matteo Bruni, confirmed that the pontiff will indeed meet with survivors of abuse. He did not specify when or where. It will most likely be in Madrid at the nunciature where the Pope will be staying. Quote, regarding some reports, I can confirm that during the upcoming apostolic journey, the Holy Father will meet with some victims of clergy abuse in Spain. The meeting has been organized by the Spanish Church. More information will be provided after the meeting, respecting the victims, their wishes, and their privacy, the spokesperson said. The timing of the statement, just hours before the Pope's departure from Rome at 8 a.m., and its tone, indicative of the situation spiraling out of control, signal a degree of unease within the Vatican that the scandal is already overshadowing the trip's agenda. The detail of specifying that the event is the responsibility of the Spanish Church is also highly significant. It indicates that the Vatican wishes to distance itself from the handling of this delicate matter, in which something has clearly gone wrong, since victims' organizations, despite not yet knowing the details, have already begun protesting and have announced a demonstration for Monday. And unfortunately, this trend of the Vatican apparently wishing to distance itself from the handling of these abuse cases, of which the Spanish Church has many and has been very public in their efforts and attempts to address it and to help the people who've been impacted, which are all ongoing. But that distancing and separation is very interesting. I feel like it's pretty apparent if you kind of pay attention to the language that has been going back and forth and coming out of the Vatican versus the Spanish Catholic Church and elsewhere as well within the Catholic Church globally. There's this distancing that seems to happen, and it feels almost to me as if only some victims are worthy of acknowledgement. The Vatican will only take the time to acknowledge certain victims in certain situations and under very controlled conditions. The official agenda makes no mention of any meeting with victims of pedophilia, and until now, it had simply stated that if one were to take place, it would be private and announced later. This is the usual practice for previous popes' trips. Furthermore, the Spanish Church did not wish to give this matter any prominence, but the secrecy surrounding this approach has ultimately sparked controversy. Victims' associations suspect that individuals with a low profile and no contact with the media will be chosen to ensure secrecy surrounding the meeting. The criticism stems precisely from the fact that this aligns with the Spanish Church's long-standing stance of denying the scandal. Expectations had grown in recent hours regarding whether the Pope would meet with the victims. British journalist Gareth Gore, known for his controversial investigative book exposing Opus Dei, revealed to El País that a source close to the Pope confirmed he would meet with a small group of abuse survivors. Gore had an audience with Leo last March, during which the Pope praised his work and, according to Gore, quote, made it very clear that he wanted to hear directly from the victims of Opus Dei abuse, end quote. I have 2 videos and a third that will be coming out where I have been discussing some of the revelations and the things that Gareth Gore told Pope Leo during this meeting that they had in March. I took some of the information that was revealed in publications after that meeting, kind of ran with it, have done some digging, and what I found, it's not good. It's not good. We're talking about victims of a very specific type of abuse, and it seems, unfortunately, that there are a number of kinds of abuses within this particular organization. And you can go and learn more about that. You can find those 2 past videos over in my content, and I hope you'll go and check them out because it's pretty interesting, and I think we need to be a little bit more aware of what's going on and what has happened. The writer tried to arrange the meeting during his trip to Spain. Quote, "Those affected wrote him a letter, which I sent to the Vatican about 2 weeks ago. This week, on Monday, I received a reply indicating that the Pope's schedule was completely full and that, therefore, it would not be possible to receive the victims of Opus Dei in an audience," he told El País. The journalist's revelation suggests that none of the victims the Pope will meet will be from Opus Dei. And I wonder why that is. Spanish victims' organizations have expressed their hurt and disappointment that the organizers of the visit did not include them in a meeting. "They treat us like trash. What can you expect from the church?" Juan Cuatro Casas, father of a victim of abuse at the Opus Dei run Gatzalueta school in Vizcaya and president of the National Association of Stolen Childhoods, ANIR, told the EFE news agency this Friday. Gore claims that Leo, during their meeting in March, quote, "was shocked and outraged to learn how high-ranking officials of the Spanish Catholic Church had dismissed former members of Opus Dei who had tried to report the abuse they suffered while in the organization." Although the Pope, the writer alleges, has shown a desire to address the issue of abuse, the organizers of the papal visit clearly had other priorities. Several victims' associations and child rights activists, including Miguel Hurtado, the first person to report the cases of pedophilia at Montserrat Abbey, plan to protest this Monday in front of the Apostolic Nunciature in Madrid. Many of them, like Gore, have written to the organizers of the trip requesting a meeting with the Pope to explain how the Spanish Church continues to re-victimize them. Quote, "There is no real commitment to us, nor any will to change. It's the same old story. Since they believe we are already participating in the state's reparation process, this is their way of continuing to pass the buck." Ciro Molina, a victim and spokesperson for ANIR in the Canary Islands, one of Leo's destinations on his trip to Spain, told this newspaper. Gore points out that several members of the organization of Leo's trip belong to Opus Dei and fears that they may have intervened to prevent the meeting with the victims of the work from taking place, which was honestly where my mind immediately went as well. Quote, "The tentacles of Opus Dei are extremely deep in Spain, as demonstrated by the fact that the entire papal visit is being managed by a numerary of Opus Dei, the same man who, in fact, was in charge of launching a smear campaign against me." Isn't that interesting? And we're going to continue to read on here because this situation evolves a bit more, and as do my thoughts and opinions on the entire thing as well. So this next article was published on Infobay. I'm translating it from its original Spanish to English. It was published June 7th. The headline says, "Associations of Victims of Pedophilia denounce that the Spanish Church has selected those who will be able to meet with Leo. Quote, it is a despicable behavior. Organizations such as the National Association for Stolen Childhood regret that the meeting only includes some victims linked to the Repara Plan, a project promoted by the Archdiocese of Madrid." There has been an effort on the part of the Spanish Catholic Church to work with the state to create reparations process and like a way for victim survivors of clerical abuse or Catholic like abuse in general. I guess it doesn't necessarily have to be a cleric, does it? To find a path forward, a healing path, and everything else, and for their suffering to be acknowledged. And this is something I've talked about in past Newsroom analyses because it's kind of been slowly developing over the last several years or so. Anyway, I will read. Juan Cuatro Casas, president of the National Association of Stolen Childhood Victims, ANIR, cannot hide his indignation. Despite the efforts made by this and other associations of victims of pedophilia in the church to meet with Pope Leo during his visit to Spain, they have received no response. Cuatro Casas laments that the pontiff will only meet this Monday afternoon with some victims who have turned to the Repara Plan, a project launched by the Archdiocese of Madrid in 2020 to support those affected by abuse. This plan has been widely criticized by associations for excluding survivors from its design, not establishing any obligation for dioceses, and not guaranteeing reparations. Quote, "We haven't received any communication. In fact, we found out through the press that the Pope was going to meet this Monday at 4:15 p.m. with a few victims of the Repara plan, when the logical thing would have been for the church to send us a statement. We regret this is underhanded, negligent, and despicable behavior on the part of the Spanish ecclesiastical hierarchy." Quatre Casas told Infobae, "This family has been seeking justice for over a decade so that the sexual abuse of their son, suffered as a teenager at the hands of Jose Maria Martinez Sanz, a member and teacher at the Opus Dei affiliated Gatzalueta School in Biscay, does not go unpunished." This particular abuse case is one of the first abuse cases that I learned about back in 2020 to 2021 when I was first beginning to dig into the pile of just like information about this organization that is kind of collected over the internet over the past many years. I didn't have to dig very far before I started to find articles talking specifically about this case, because 2020 onward was when it was like really gearing up and blowing up. There was a lot of discussion in the paper. There were the trial for Martinez Sanz and his eventual conviction as well as a pedophile. All of that was playing out, and this is one of the first cases that I found, and one of the first that alerted me to the fact that, in my opinion, there's seriously a problem within Opus Dei, and they are, for whatever reason, simply incapable of providing a safe environment for the vulnerable people who end up coming through their doors, be they children or vulnerable adults. With the aim of expressing their unease and outrage at the church's stance, the associations and groups of victims and survivors, ANIR, AVA Navarra, Lulacris, Justice Initiative Spain, and the Patsy Exquiaga Victims Platform from La Salle School in San Sebastian have called a press conference for today, Monday, at 10 a.m. in front of the Apostolic Nunciature in Madrid, the Holy See's embassy, and the location where the Pope is staying. The demonstration coincides with the scheduled meeting between the Pope and the Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez. All apologies for any mispronunciations on those proper nouns there. I know that was not perfect or flawless in any way, and I mean no disrespect. Those who have been dissenting, so to speak, have been sidelined. The Pope will be presented with victims of the Repara plan as examples of what the Church has done well to Spain, while the victims who have resorted to the government's new reparations program and who disagreed with what the Church offered are being pushed aside, Quatre Casas maintains. He also points out that victims connected to Opus Dei face greater difficulties in being heard by the Pope, since, quote, those responsible for coordinating his visit to Spain, Fernando Jimenez Barraconal and Iago de la Sierva, are members of that same organization. The new avenue for the redress for victims of church-related pedophilia mentioned by Quatre Casas stems from a protocol signed on March 30th by the Ombudsman, the president of the Spanish Episcopal Conference, and the minister of the presidency, and the president of the Spanish Conference of Religious. The initiative is designed to address cases where legal recourse is no longer possible, either because the statute of limitations has expired or because the perpetrator has died, and allows for requests for financial, symbolic, or restorative reparations. And that sounds great on the face of it. That sounds like a really good start and a very necessary thing. But as we were just reading moments ago, there are people who have taken serious issue with this entire reparations plan that has been set up. This process does not establish predetermined scales or financial amounts, as each case is analyzed individually. The final decision rests with the church, and the state is and the church is responsible for paying any compensation award. Pope Leo himself referred to the abuses committed within the church this Saturday in response to questions from journalists traveling with him on the plane that took him from Rome to Adolfo Suarez Madrid Barajas Airport. Quote, "It remains an open wound," he affirmed. While associations and victims are calling for greater openness and transparency in the meetings, the Pope's visit continues to be marked by the massive participation of the faithful. This Sunday, more than 1 million people attended the Mass celebrated in Cibeles Square, where the pontiff called for abandoning, quote, a comfortable and private faith in order to commit to the common good. So if you have watched any of my other content, tuned in for any of my other newsroom analyses or anything else, you will know that I have been pretty critical of the Catholic Church and of specific pontiffs and their handling of the abuse crises that is occurring within the Catholic Church as a whole, and then by default within these like smaller Catholic organizations like Opus Dei or the Sodalitium, which is now completely defunct, or Miles Jesu or Miles Christi, these other organizations, the SSPX, that has been connected to controversy. I've been critical of their response because to me it has sounded like a lot of words without anything substantial to actually back it up. I went on a pretty long rant about that in my most recent upload. You can go and hear my thoughts there. I'm not going to rehash it all here, but suffice it to say, I wish that I had more trust or faith in this religious organization's ability to do the right thing and get a handle on this issue. But, you know, as I always say, this is a 2,000-year-old religious organization with a 2,000-year-old paper trail of abuse. And that is simply an undeniable fact. And it has been comfortable doing things a certain way, despite the existence of that completely real and verifiable paper trail. Are they going to change now? The only reason they seem to be reacting at all is because people are displeased and having a reaction to it. Were it not for that, would they be doing anything at all to help these people in any way, shape, or form? I'm kind of left wondering. And I wish I had more faith in all of these different initiatives and plans and reaffirmations of suffering and shared commitment to a better way forward and everything else. I wish I had some faith that that was actually going to become something substantial and that it wasn't just a whole bunch of hot air. But unfortunately, especially when we're reading like about situations like what happened in Spain with all these different victims and everything, the fallout from it doesn't really create the feeling, at least for me personally, that this thing is like being taken seriously or that due diligence is being paid to all of the affected parties. It really doesn't feel that way, and it really sucks. And I know there are so many people who are waiting and hoping and expecting that this Pope in particular, Pope Leo, is going to be the Pope that will continue to bring about a more progressive and just church, the kind of church that the previous Pope, Pope Francis, was allegedly building towards as well. And they are waiting for the Vatican and for the Pope to do something substantial. And I wish I felt that their faith and their trust wasn't being misplaced. But we're going to read this next article here, and I think there's kind of a general like trend or vibe that will begin to emerge from these different articles talking about how Pope Leo moved through this visit in Spain. So this is, I believe this is from a German or Polish news site. I translated it to English. The title says, Encounter with approximately 8,000 believers. Pope Leo speaks with active Catholics in Madrid. This was published on June 9th. The Catholic Church in Madrid is more vibrant than in many other European capitals. However, secularization and individualization are also taking their toll. For Pope Leo, this is a cause for words of encouragement. And here is the picture of, I guess, where he met to speak with all of these Catholics. It's a gigantic stadium. It's like a football stadium or something, probably. And it's pretty packed, like all the way around. There are people, and then you have this area down here on the floor, and there's like red carpet, and there are places where people are sitting, and then it all kind of leads up to this raised like staging area, and then over here where it looks like there are like chairs set up. I mean, this is a full-on production, and not exactly cozy either. With 2 appearances within the church, Pope Leo concluded the first 3 days of his trip to Spain on Monday evening, a trip that focused entirely on the capital, Madrid. On Monday afternoon, he first led a Liturgy of the World with Marian devotion in Madrid Cathedral. Afterwards, he met with approximately 80,000 Catholics at the Bernabeu Stadium, home of the capital's football club, Real Madrid. And I suppose maybe I'm being snarky by pointing this out, but I feel like it's just worth pointing out. He didn't meet with these people. He went and had an appearance and showed up, and all of these people gathered to gawk at him. There's absolutely no feasible way that he would have been able to actually meet with any of these people. Maybe he shook like 1 or 2 people's hands or something on his way in as he was like waving at everybody on his way up to his stage. But like, again, this is not like a cozy meeting where everybody's having the chance to like sit down and explain their like perspective or explain the experiences that they've had or ask for anything. It's just not that kind of like situation whatsoever. The topic of the Pope's meeting with clergy and laity was expected to be the particular challenges that a modern metropolis poses for pastoral care and the proclamation of the Catholic Church. The Pope was expected to offer encouragement to Catholics in an increasingly difficult social environment. Officially, 79% of Madrid's population is Catholic. In predominantly Catholic Madrid, the church has been struggling with declining church attendance for several years. Demand for church weddings and baptisms is also decreasing. Nevertheless, with an official Catholic population of 79%, Madrid remains a stronghold of the church compared to other European capitals. Two powerful independent movements within the Catholic Church emerged in Madrid during the 20th century, both of which have since spread worldwide. Opus Dei, comprised of both lay people and priests, and the Neo-Catechumenal Way, I probably did not pronounce that right, Neo-Catechumenal Way, a lay movement. However, the Pope's itinerary did not include meetings with representatives of these organizations. And here's a picture. See, just like I said, he's like coming in on like a cart and he's like waving at the people, and they're packed in like rats back behind this fence, and there's like guards here keeping them away from the fence even. So that's the closest that they can get. They can wave at him as he goes by, and that is how the Pope met with 80,000 Spanish Catholics. Yeah, he did that instead of meeting with the victims of these organizations that answer directly to him. Yep, sure did. So, next article. This is from the Daily Reporter. Pope Leo urges Spanish bishops to provide reparations to abuse survivors. Do you remember a moment ago where I said that we talked about that distancing that the Vatican has been attempting to place between itself and the Spanish church? But I'm sure this extends to dioceses all over the world where there are conflicts, scandals, and that kind of thing. They're distancing themselves. And here we are. He's urging Spanish bishops, do what you need to do. Pope Leo told Spain's Catholic hierarchy on Monday to provide reparations to survivors of clergy sexual abuse and deal with the crisis transparently ahead of an expected meeting with survivors during his week-long visit to the country. I do find that sentence a little bit interesting, telling the Spanish Catholic Church to deal with this issue, this crisis, transparently. Particularly when it does not appear to me in any way, shape, or form, in my opinion, that the Vatican or even these pontiffs preceding him, and perhaps even Leo himself, are capable of exercising that same transparency. Leo told Spanish bishops the entire church community should have an ever more determined commitment to prevention and a culture of care. Spanish hierarchy has largely dismissed the scale of abuse in their church for decades until a newspaper began documenting a legacy of abuse and cover-up. Faced with this scourge, the ecclesial community is called to respond with listening, truth, justice, reparation, Leo said. Every wounded person must be able to find sincere listening, welcome, protection, and real paths to healing. Spain launched a reparation system this year. Amid public outrage over the abuse crisis, they launched a reparation system for clerical abuse cases too old to be prosecuted. It requires the participation of the Catholic Church and Spanish government. Other countries and churches have set up reparation mechanisms to compensate survivors and provide therapy, but the Spanish one is unusual in that it gives the government a strong role in the process and the final say in payouts. The system, which is not legally binding, has drawn praise and some skepticism from advocacy groups and survivors. It gives people a year to apply. Ahead of the expected meeting with Leo, several groups representing survivors said they were left in the dark about the encounter and held a small protest outside the Vatican's embassy in Madrid. Our associations are pleased that a group of victims from the reparation plan can be heard by the Pope, but they do not represent all victims, and deep down they are being used by the Church, by the Bishops' Conference, to clean up the image of a Spanish church that has never been able to live up to its victims, said Juan Cuatro Casas, a spokesperson for the Robbed Childhood Association. Bars. Mic drop. And unfortunately, that is exactly what I have heard from advocates and activists, victim survivors of Catholic abuse of whatever variety. And this is not something that is only applicable to the Spanish Catholic Church, unfortunately. And like I said a moment ago, I think it's interesting for the Pope to be demanding that these Spanish bishops behave with transparency when his own governmental body has hardly been able to say that they have done that, although I'm sure in their own minds they've gone above and beyond, but they can only go so far. Because if you really get down to the brass tacks of why these problems exist and why they continue to happen, in my opinion, it is in large part due to the system of operation that exists within the Catholic Church, within many organized religions. When you have a hierarchical structure that gets ever narrower towards the top, the likelihood that the people at the bottom will become disenfranchised and underrepresented is pretty high. And we know that predators exploit loopholes, exploit weaknesses, look for places where they can infiltrate and become a fixture and gain easy access to whatever their prey is. And there are many, many advocates and survivors who have pointed out the fact that there are conditions within the Catholic Church that aid and abet these predators more so than they do provide a protective environment for vulnerable people. Across the world, clergy sexual abuse and cover-up scandals have rocked Catholic dioceses, damaging the Church's reputation more than 3 decades after the crisis first erupted publicly in the West, and that is because the damage is incalculable. Leo reaffirms the Church's right to confessional secrecy. Isn't it interesting how they throw that word in next? Right after we get done talking about how these groups and the Church in general are not living up to and accurately representing its many victims, that these scandals and cover-ups have a global impact, have happened all around the world. But Leo wants to make sure that we all know that the Church has a right to confessional secrecy specifically. And you want to know why that's interesting to me? It's because there was a case here not too long ago, within the last 6 months or so, here in the United States, where I want to say it was the state of Washington, or maybe it was the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. I can't remember specifically. But there was legislation that was introduced that would basically make it mandatory for priests, religious, to be mandatory reporters. If you see something, say something. And that would have basically done away with the whole seal of confession, which is this big theological construct within the Catholic Church around its sacrament of reconciliation. It would do away with that. And that would fundamentally alter and change a lot about the Catholic Church's doctrine and its teachings. And it received so much pushback. The idea that priests, religious, people interacting with children should be mandatory reporters and be required to report abuse when they learn of it. That was, oh my gosh, such a religious infringement, such an infringement on religious liberty. And they got it overturned. And from the top down, it's coming from the Church. The Church has every right to that confessional secrecy. And where else does that extend to? Do you think? It gets into sticky, sticky territory, especially when you're talking about organizations like Opus Dei, for example, who has been accused of violating and weaponizing the confessional seal in order to gain information about individual members that they can then exploit. That creates a very specific type of abuse. But if you can't ever report it, you can't ever talk about it because you're under a seal. Are you ever going to get a handle on the issue? Leo also affirmed the right of the Catholic Church to maintain secrecy involving the sacrament of confession, amid efforts in Europe and elsewhere to force Catholic priests to report abuse that they learn about during the one-to-one conversations. Independent investigations into clergy abuse around the world have identified the seal of confession as a major impediment to exposing and preventing abuse and called for it to be abolished. The investigations have documented how abusers used the confessional to solicit sex from minors and then relied on the seal of confession to keep it a secret. In his speech to the Spanish Parliament Monday, Leo framed the right of the Church to keep priest-penitent conversations confidential as a matter of religious freedom. Quote, to protect it legally, as is done in a similar way in some professions, means preserving a sacred space of inner freedom where the believer can open his or her soul to God without fear of external pressures, he said. Well, the only problem with that, though, is when he says in some professions, he's talking about like doctors, therapists, counselors, people who are bound by like HIPAA to not reveal information about their clients, information that's divulged to them during sessions, except and unless they learn of like grave harm that's going to be committed either by the person that they are counseling or by the person to someone else, to themselves, whatever the case. In that case, they are required to report that. In that case, HIPAA and whatever other confidential protections that are in place no longer apply, because it is more important to prevent harm than it is to hold up this like ironclad idea of like perfect secrecy. Secrets don't make friends. Remember that, kids. Former Opus Dei members say they couldn't meet with Leo. Some former members of the powerful Catholic movement Opus Dei, which was founded in Spain and remains influential there, were unable to get a meeting with Leo. They had sought to speak with him while he was in Madrid about psychological and other abuses they say they suffered in the movement. Quote, "We do not speak out of bitterness, nor do we seek any kind of revenge. Rather, we speak out of a sense of responsibility and moral duty to those who have firsthand knowledge of a reality that has caused grave harm to the church and suffering to many people," 8 former members wrote to Leo on May 24th in asking for an audience. Leo's office received the letter but was unable to arrange the meeting at such a late date, said Gareth Gore, an author who met with the Pope at the Vatican in March about a book he wrote in 2024 on alleged abuses in Opus Dei that the movement strongly rejected as unfounded. In declining the meeting, Leo might want to avoid suggestions he was interfering in church and Argentine investigations into the movement. In 2024, Argentine prosecutors concluded that there were grounds for launching a criminal investigation into its top South American officials on charges of human trafficking and labor exploitation against 44 women. Of course, Opus Dei in Argentina has denied the accusations. And we do have an update about all of that here in a moment. But I wanted to read this article because the headline says one thing, right? Pope Leo urges Spanish bishops to provide reparations to abuse survivors. But when we get into the meat and taters of the thing, when we're actually reading the article itself, a number of themes begin to emerge, do they not? At least one major one, which again is that distancing and that unwillingness to acknowledge all victims of abuse, apparently. Can't be done. Couldn't spare the time to meet with these people who've been personally impacted by the religious organization that Pope Leo is now in charge of, but he had time to be drug around in a cart in a stadium in front of 80,000 people. He had time for that. When you are the leader of an organization like this, I understand your time is valuable. I understand it's a large organization, and I understand you cannot personally meet with each and every single person who might want to meet with you. So you better make damn sure that you choose the right people to meet with. And I don't know, maybe, just maybe, it might have been a better idea to meet with people who've actually been harmed by the organization that you're in charge of, by an organization that is supposed to answer directly to you. Maybe that would have been a better use of your time than going to drive around in circles in a stadium and wave at people from a stage. I mean, come on, people. Be so for real. Be so serious right now. How is this not completely like a joke to everybody? So that concludes the articles that I wanted to read about this whole visit to Spain by the Pope and the discussion and the fallout around it. Please weigh in the comments below and let me know what your thoughts on this entire situation is. If you live in a country where the Pope's going to be coming to visit or has visited, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and what that was like, or how people are feeling ahead of the visit if it still hasn't happened yet. I would be very curious to know, and I would be curious to know, especially if you're a Catholic, how you feel about the way that the Pope and the Vatican and these like individual dioceses have gone about addressing and handling these abuse cases. Do you feel like it's sufficient, or are you kind of more like me, where you're standing over here wondering like why it is so incredibly difficult to just do the bare minimum and like acknowledge that these people exist and that their experiences are real? I don't know. So moving on, this article, I believe this is translated from, this is a crazy name that I'm not going to try to pronounce because I would not be able to do it well, but I'm going to guess this is Polish or maybe Hungarian. This was published on June 13th. Single-sex school for dictatorship. A dozen years ago, segregated Catholic elementary schools for girls and boys were opened by a group of conservative parents from the Rhino Institute, which is a super unfortunate name because Being called a rhino, at least in American conservative politics, is not a compliment. The children's spiritual guidance is provided by Opus Dei, which developed during the Franco dictatorship. In these institutions, a conservative activist elite is systematically created with the aim of influencing liberal democratic institutions. My most recent deep dive, the formal scripted, heavily researched deep dive that I have uploaded, is specifically about Opus Dei's infiltration of higher education in the United States. And I wanted to focus on that because the things that I was finding when I went digging were really, really interesting. If you haven't seen that video, please go and check it out, because it took me a long time to put that research together. And it also includes the effort of a couple of former attendees of these Opus Dei educational outlets, basically, and they were willing to speak with me and share their time. So if you haven't seen it, please go and check it out. But I wanted to talk about this article because I do not believe that Opus Dei's behavior is landlocked to any one particular geographic region, because it is a global organization that seems to replicate its modus operandi nearly identically at every single place that it goes, or it very much tries to, if it at all has the option. So this says, the Ministry of Science, Education, and Youth said in a statement to Novosti that it will not react to a video posted on Facebook by the Lauterstadt Elementary School on the occasion of the Walk for Life, in which 9-year-old students smile and spread misinformation about abortion and life from conception, specifying the weeks after pregnancy when the fetus allegedly feels pain and a heartbeat. These Opus Dei schools that are the initiatives of these Opus Dei families, basically, have come under fire before for providing inaccurate information to students, particularly in regard to matters like human reproduction and sexual health. The one that I'm thinking of, the best example of this, is there was a Four Corners ABC documentary that came out in 2022 or 23 that specifically focused on these two Opus Dei schools in New South Wales, Australia, Redfield College and Tangara School for Girls, that are part of this Opus Dei educational initiative called PARED, started by these Opus Dei families. And in this documentary, the investigative journalist discovered that the school was redacting information in textbooks, literally lining out information that they didn't think students should have access to in regard to human reproduction and sexual health. They were giving students inaccurate information about the effects of pornography consumption on the human brain, for example. There was a young woman who said that she was told that watching pornography would literally create holes in your brain, and they were shown fake brain scans that appeared to show these holes or whatever. Really, really crazy and concerning behavior, frankly, from people who are supposed to be educators. And this is feeling very reminiscent of all of that. This is a school in a completely different country, in a completely different region of the world. In a statement to Novosti, the ministry recalled that the school was founded in 2016 as the first Catholic primary school for boys in Croatia. There we are. Since it is a private school with public rights, the school institution plans all activities in cooperation with the Teachers' Council, the Parents' Council, and the school board, the ministry said, adding that it respects the school's autonomy, provided that the school complies with all positive regulations of the Republic of Croatia. In other words, it refuses to react because it is a Catholic private school, ignoring the entire context of a potential violation of children's rights. The Initiative for the Freedom of Croatia reacted to this, calling the video harmful, above all, to the children who participated in it. The Ombudsman for Children assessed that the elementary school, these are such young kids, not even in middle school yet, had exposed the students to a situation that could be interpreted as ideological exploitation of children, and that publishing footage of the children on social media for the purpose of promoting ideological beliefs was not in their best interests. Please stop posting your children online. Please take down the pictures of your children that you've posted online. Nobody needs to see what your children look like, especially not in situations where they're half naked in the bathtub in a swimsuit at the beach. Nobody needs to see those pictures of your kids. I have quit following people or muted people's accounts who post pictures of their kids because I don't want to see it. And your child cannot consent. No child can consent to their image being shared because they don't have the ability to exercise the informed consent to authentically give their permission for something like that. It's disgusting. Please stop it. I highly believe that in the next couple of decades, the overexposure of children online will be considered a type of child abuse. I believe that it should be considered a type of child abuse unequivocally, especially if you're using your child to make money on social media. That's kind of a topic for a different day. The school in question responded that the parents of the children in the video had signed consent and that they had done the entire project as part of the celebration of International Day for Life, which is an integral part of the curriculum. Of course. Well, guess what? Just because somebody consents to something does not mean that the thing that they consented to was a good idea. And these are all adults here making these decisions, and they want to pass the buck off on to anybody that they possibly can. The government thus refuses to interfere in its own business and ignores the context of potential violations of children's rights, while a private Catholic school transparently shows what content it exposes minors to. An analysis of their work also reveals the reasons for such a casual approach. 10 years ago, a group of conservative parents opened Catholic elementary schools for girls and boys through the Religious Society Parental Institute for Education, RINO. First, they opened up the Ruziznek kindergarten, and then the Ruziznak Elementary School for girls, and then the Lauterstadt Elementary School for boys. I apologize for those mispronunciations. I know that was hideous. Segregated private schools were able to open with the help of the Catholic Church. The Archdiocese of Zagreb officially decreed canonical approval for them to bear a Catholic name and integrate into the pastoral system, thanks to the provisions of the Vatican treaties. On an annual basis, these schools received around 1.3 million euros from the state budget for the teachers' salaries, books, and reading materials, while the city of Zagreb pays around 380,000 euros for similar expenses, thus covering the largest part of the total annual costs from the public budget. So, and I'm assuming a public budget is composed of like taxpayer funds, so the taxpayer is footing that bill. For Croatian conditions, the model is unique. Parents claim to run the school, while the Catholic prelature of Opus Dei takes care of the spiritual guidance of children in school chapels. It is a model that was created in the 1950s in Spain at the initiative of parents and educators inspired by the teachings of Jose Maria Escriva de Balaguer, the founder of Opus Dei, who asked believers to take greater responsibility for the education of their own children. Escriva founded Opus Dei in 1928. We know that. Came up through the regime of General Francisco Franco. And he believed in the power of education to build new Catholic elites and infiltrate the Orthodox into key centers of power that would in the future fulfill his version of a world based on rigid traditionalism. 100 years after its founding, Opus Dei has around 90,000 members worldwide. That number is hotly contested. We believe it's far fewer. Many of them are influential politicians, judges, doctors, and scientists, all of whom promote the ideas of their founder in their work. Critics accuse his organization of creating a personality cult, misogyny, aggressive youth recruitment, psychological control of members, financial opacity, and a desire for a theocratic dystopia. Members and supporters ignore or deny the accusations. In 2 segregated schools in Zagreb, quotes from the founder are used almost daily. With the help of Opus members, they were initiated by parents who were active in the Croatian anti-gender movement. One of the first presidents of the Rhino Institute, Lugia Murgic, spoke publicly on behalf of the association. The current principal of the boys' school, Marin Divic, was a candidate in 2015 on the parliamentary list of the UIME Obitil party, of a political party in Croatia, we'll just say, instead of me continuing to stumble over that, which functioned as the political wing of the association of the same name. Markic founded the Association Family Enrichment, which educated parents of these schools. At one time, the association was headed by Vice Bottarello, president of Vigilare, who was close to Opus Dei circles. This association took over the parent education program from the Umbrella International Institution, which states that its work is inspired by the doctrine of the founder of Opus Dei himself. The interesting thing about umbrella institutions is that this is not the first time that I've read about an umbrella institution in correlation to Opus Dei. I did a deep dive about a year ago or so into a Spanish doctor of psychiatry who is affiliated very closely with Opus Dei, has a very strange professional career when you actually like get down to looking at his credentials and how he acquired them and everything. And he is indirectly connected to an umbrella organization or an umbrella institute in Switzerland. That's called Limmat Stiftung. And Limmat Stiftung is basically a giant, like, money collection entity, and it takes in funds on basically umbrella institutes are ways for people to give charitable donations to organizations or causes that they care about. I'm talking about like really, really rich people give money to these organizations that they care about, and rather than taking the time to like do all that hard work for themselves, they'll donate it to an umbrella organization that they like, and that umbrella organization then diffuses those funds down to whatever organizations are below it. And in Limmat Stiftung's case, I found that it was connected to a number of the like domestic schools that Opus Dei runs for its assistant numeraries, which is an area that people have become incredibly critical of because of the fact that former assistant numeraries have come out and said that they were essentially labor trafficked into the organization as minors, as children, through these schools that are funded by an umbrella organization. Here we have an umbrella organization that's funding these schools in Croatia. I'm just pointing out the similarities. I'm pointing out the patterns. I think it's good to draw people's attention to those things. The intensive involvement of parents in the work of these schools is one of the most important features of this system. Another key element is the mentoring of each individual student. A student's personal mentor is most often a teacher who is obliged to meet with the child privately at least twice a month, while meeting with the parents twice a year. The content of these mentoring sessions, according to the Rhino Institute's website, is focused on discussing school progress, favorite activities, relationships with family members and friends, i.e., everything that counts as education and upbringing. So literally every aspect of that child's life. The official Facebook page where the video was posted illustrates the ideological profile of the teacher tutors in these schools. In one picture, teachers pose with students at the Walk for Life. And another, teachers stand vigil in front of a Zagreb hospital trying to dissuade women from having abortions. Parents are also fully involved in all of the details of sex education, which is conducted through various subjects and is based on chastity and abstinence. Abstinence-only sex education does not work. If you don't believe me, look at the teen birth rates for states like Alabama and Mississippi and Tennessee, where these abstinence-only sex education programs were pushed in private schools. They don't work. They don't work. And oh, by the way, I just think it's worth pointing out that since Roe v. Wade was overturned, abortion rates have not gone down. They have gone up. So much for saving babies, I guess. Last year's program for the boys' school states that for 7th and 8th graders, education was provided by the Grozd Association, led by conservative activists and a family member, a physics teacher at Rhino Schools who educated the students' mothers about the program. I am not intentionally avoiding saying these people's names because I don't want to say them. I am not confident that I can pronounce them correctly, and I don't want to insult them. So you can read the screen and see the names if you want to know the specific names of these people. But these are just the people who are behind this school and its initiatives. Grozd's Teen Star program states that homosexuality goes against the very nature of the sexual act, that safe sex does not exist, and that the only reliable method is abstinence. Abortion is described as violence against the unborn child and deeply traumatic for the mother. This is the program taught to children in a single-sex school under the spiritual supervision of members of Opus Dei. Yes, and I wouldn't expect anything different from a conservative religious outfit. This is all very, very in line and in keeping with the rhetoric. According to some estimates, the school model of the founding parents close to Opus Dei is implemented in hundreds of primary and secondary schools and educational centers around the world. In a study published in the sociological journal Wiley Sociology Compass, it is precisely these models of schools and centers influenced by the prelature and related to conservative orders, such as the Legionaries of Christ, that are used as important locations for the development of anti-gender activities. I would like to read that study. If anybody knows the full, I'll try to find it later. If anyone knows the full title, though, I'd like to read that. Analyzing Spain and Mexico, they concluded that students within educational institutions and elite universities under the auspices of these organizations are psychologically and ideologically mobilized, transforming themselves into what sociologists call moral entrepreneurs. Through systemic mentoring, spiritual renewal, and work in youth centers, young people are prepared to take an active role in the public sphere, where they launch moral battles against the rights of sexual minorities, abortion laws, euthanasia, and the secular order, filling the ranks of international lobbying organizations such as HASSL and Citizen Go, which are affiliated with Opus Dei. These are like political lobbying organizations. From an early age, a new conservative activist elite is systematically created through these educational institutions with the aim of influencing liberal democratic institutions. Although the prelature is not the owner of the Zagreb schools on paper and claims to exclusively perform the entrusted spiritual and pastoral tasks, there its members occupied key management positions about 2 years ago. The head of the Rhino Institute was Spaniard Angel Gonzalez de Rabago. 2 years before that, the school officially became part of the International Parentes Foundation based in Madrid. This is a global network of about 50 parent schools with the same segregation model, mostly under the spiritual supervision of Opus Dei, which helps Zagreb schools with finances, promotion, and enrollment and strategies for improving educational work. Principals and teachers from Zagreb schools regularly go to conferences and training in Spain to institutions that are also affiliated with Opus Dei. So, as someone I've quoted very recently said, it is a sophistry to distinguish any of these organizations from purely Opus Dei ventures. Opus Dei is very invested in the outcomes of these schools. Why? There are a few different reasons: money, recruitment of new members, and oh, by the way, this little thing that they are carrying out, this mission of re-Christianization of the entire world in line with its founder, Jose Maria Escriva's teachings. And when you say that, people act like you're a crazy conspiracy theorist for saying that, but this is not information I'm pulling out of thin air. This is not information that Gareth Gore is pulling out of thin air. This is coming from within the organization itself, in its writings, in the statements of its leadership, in the testimonies of former members and victim survivors. This is a very intentional set of activities that are being undertaken for a very specific purpose and goal. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, because these are not just some Catholic families who want to raise their children in keeping with the Catholic Church's like moral teachings and everything else. This is a very, very specific flavor and brand of Catholicism. This is Opus Dei Catholicism, which does not look like the kind of Catholicism that most of us who grew up in a more socially just environment are familiar or aware of. It's authoritarian, it's nationalistic, it's fascistic, I would argue, because of the fact that this organization was put together through Franco's dictatorship in Spain, and he was a fascist leader, and there's history between Opus Dei and Franco as well, between Jose Maria Escriva and Franco, and like his cabinet and his military and everything. Like, it's not a conspiracy theory. It is a conspiracy, but it's not a conspiracy theory. And you can see that, and from articles like what we're reading right here, they're laying out that strategy very, very plainly. And it's not difficult to see. You don't have to like read nuance and meaning into it. Just look at the activities, look at the things that they are doing, look at what they are promoting and how. It tells you everything that you need to know. The Parentes Foundation was founded by Spanish billionaire Miguel Arrufat, who became rich by founding online universities and private educational conglomerates through the powerful Pro-Educa group, and his foundation and interests in Croatia are operationally represented by the company Via Parentes Du, namely directors Luis Gonzalez Conde, Ramon Francisco Sierra Salinas, and the president of Rhino, Angel Gonzalez de Rabago, who are respectively prominent members and administrators within structures close to the leadership of the prelature. So Opus Dei through and through. And honestly, it would probably be a really interesting deep dive to go through and look at this network of these parent schools and how they're organized and their connections to Opus Dei and everything, and sort of the outcome for people who are sent to these schools and come out the other side, because they are graduates and they are talking, and not everything that they say is like a glowing 5-star review. That would probably be an interesting deep dive. So let me know if any of you are at all interested in that, and I would definitely do that. Within the Opus Dei organization, Rhino's leader, Rabago, once stated that he had the status of a numerary, of which there are only about 10% in the organization's total structure. Numeraries are people who have dedicated their lives entirely to the organization, taking a lifelong vow of celibacy, poverty, and unconditional obedience. Some of them also use specific methods of self-control and penance, including self-punishment by flagellation and wearing a cecilium, a barbed wire strip around the thigh for 2 hours a day to numb the urges. The most important and primary mission of each numerary story always remains the same: the systemic recruitment and indoctrination of new, young, and promising members into the ranks of Opus Dei. In an interview in Spanish media in 2013, Rabago said that Opus Dei sent him to Croatia to help establish schools, cultural centers, homes, and other related institutions. For the past decade and a half, he has been actively involved in the work of the association that built their men's center in Zagreb, and for a time he also ran the local youth soccer club. Research in some other countries has shown that such educational institutions and youth clubs serve as a front for the early recruitment of children into Opus Dei. According to the testimonies of numerous former members to the Financial Times, in a number of countries, the organization has lured children in their early teens, often as young as 14 or 15, who attended their schools or visited their affiliated youth centers. These children, without their parents' knowledge, often as young as 14 or 15, who attended their schools or visited their affiliated... Oh, I skipped the line. These children, without their parents' knowledge or consent, were subjected to a sophisticated technique of psychological profiling and emotional manipulation. Mentors and clergy used private one-on-one conversations and confessions to map out the teens' deepest insecurities, fears, and family problems, then misused this intimate information to systematically sever ties with their families and create a total dependency on the organization. I am experiencing technical difficulties right now. My webcam just freaked out and turned into a pixelated mess. I'm hoping that it's gonna fix itself in a second here. I recently switched my internet and I'm using Starlink for the first time, and that's kind of been an interesting experience. And the biggest gripe that I have with it right now is the fact that the signal routinely drops. It's not stable. And when it drops, your internet connection goes, anything that you're working on freezes, and then it'll all reset in a moment. I'm gonna see if this will correct itself. One moment. I'm so sorry. I may have to... There I am. Now I'm back. Technology, man. I am working through it as much as I possibly can. I want to do this work so badly, but the internet thing, it fights me every single day. So thank you for bearing with me through the technical glitches and difficulties and things. I really appreciate it. The most severe and shocking example of indoctrination involved indoctrinating minors into extreme forms of physical penance and asceticism in their daily lives. Under the guise of consecration of suffering, teenagers were forced to wear sackcloth around their thighs for several hours a day and to regularly whip themselves on the back. Not appropriate behavior to be encouraging in young people whatsoever. Not appropriate. The entire process was permeated with a deep sense of guilt, fear of eternal damnation, and strict secrecy. The children were explicitly ordered not to tell their parents about these practices, as well as their divine calling to become celibate members or numeraries, on the grounds that the family would become a tool of Satan that obstructs God's will. So they are literally weaponizing the beliefs and faith of these small children, these boys and girls who are underage and unable to exercise true informed consent, to convince them to commit to something that they have no business committing to. You cannot take a vow of celibacy and obedience and chastity and everything else at the age of 14. That's just not appropriate. You're not a fully developed person yet. Boys and girls are taught at an early age that masturbation causes mental illness, that abortion is worse than murder, and that losing one's virginity before marriage permanently defiles and destroys a person, leading to official investigations into the schools responsible, led by the PARED Foundation. This Australian foundation is still listed as a parallel programming institution on Rhino's website. Of course it is. It's a part of the Opus network. The most serious allegations have been made in Argentina, where a criminal investigation is underway against several high-ranking members of Opus Dei. This organization has been sued by 44 women for forced unpaid labor that began in 1975. They were recruited in poor areas with the promise of education and ended up as numeraria assistants, the lowest caste who do unpaid housework for male members. In various branches around the world, they worked up to 15 hours a day with complete control over bank accounts and documents. One of them allegedly served Monsignor Mariano Fazio for years, who is now the second man in the global organization. In early 2026, he was also put on the list of defendants. The key charge is human trafficking. The leadership of Opus Dei denies the charges, claiming that it is an administrative misunderstanding over the payment of Social Security contributions. Just a misunderstanding, guys. I mean, these women are saying that, like, they didn't have paperwork, didn't have access to their passports, were transferred internationally across international borders. Um, but it's just a administrative error, guys. Insane. So moving right along, we are getting down to the end here. Thank you for sticking with me. These are usually a little bit lengthy because I like to take my time reading through these, and I try to make it as short of a list as possible. You should see how many news articles I have before I go through and like pare down and decide what I want to read. If we were actually reading everything, we would be here for days. So this next article, this is specifically about that case of the 44 women in Argentina. And so I wanted to include it next because it kind of gives a little bit of an update and kind of what can be expected next. We're getting close, it feels like, to where some sort of a verdict or decision will be handed down at some point in the not too distant future. It would be great if it would be before the end of the year, but I have no idea if that will be the case. I don't know anything about Argentine law or how long things like that take. It's a lot of really, really hard work, but it feels like we are getting close to something happening. And this headline says, the Court of Cassation decides the future of the case accusing Opus Dei of recruiting girls for domestic service. This was published on June 12th. The fourth chamber will have to decide whether to continue or dismiss the investigation into human trafficking and forced labor initiated following complaints from 44 women. According to the prosecution, they were recruited as children or teenagers and forced into unpaid domestic work. For more than 4 decades, girls and teenagers from low-income families were allegedly part of a structure that promised them education, training, and better life opportunities. However, years later, many of them reported that they ended up exclusively dedicated to domestic tasks for Opus Dei without pay and under conditions that the courts are investigating as possible cases of human trafficking and forced labor. Now the case has entered a decisive stage. The fourth chamber of the Federal Court of Cassation must determine whether the criminal action remains valid or whether the alleged events have expired under the statute of limitations. The main defendant in the case is Gabriel Benito Maria Dondo, accused of human trafficking and forced labor. The decision rests with judges Javier Cabajo, Gustavo Hornos, and Mariano Borinsky. According to the complaint that gave rise to the investigation, between 1972 and 2015, people who held different positions and ranks within Opus Dei allegedly formed a structure intended to recruit at least 44 women, most of them when they were still children or teenagers. According to the indictment, the victims were primarily recruited from economically vulnerable backgrounds with the promise of access to education, training, and job opportunities. Once enrolled as students in institutions linked to the religious organization, they began a process of spiritual, professional, and vocational training. The investigation maintains that those young women who expressed interest in becoming numerary auxiliaries were permanently assigned to perform domestic tasks within centers belonging to Opus Dei. So numerary associates, numerary auxiliaries, same thing. According to the prosecution's hypothesis, the women worked long hours without receiving remuneration and provided services both in the organization's establishments in Argentina and in other countries. The tasks included domestic chores intended to assist members of the institution and people linked to it who carried out academic, professional, and spiritual training activities. The case gained relevance due to the number of alleged victims involved in the extensive time period covered by the reported events, which would have lasted for more than 40 years. The discussions that the Federal Court of Criminal Cassation must now resolve is not centered on the existence or non-existence of the reported events, but on determining whether the time elapsed prevents continuing with criminal prosecution. So this is a pretty critical decision that they're going to be making. I may have an update for the July Newsroom analysis. Maybe we'll have an update by then. I'm not sure that as far as I know, there has been no decision as of yet. But if they do decide that it can't proceed because of the statute of limitations, well, that's going to remove some options for the affected people, which is certainly really unfortunate. So, but there's not much that you can do about the way that the law is written, and that is of course why there's been so much work being done by activists and lawmakers to attempt to drive and direct policy that handles situations where something like this situation being outside the statute of limitations wouldn't be as big of a deal, where there like are options for people who are outside of that like time limit, or that time limit needs to be altered or done away with simply because of the fact that people who are put through situations like this, who are in abusive situations, it can take them decades and decades and decades to come to grips with the fact that they were even in a messed up situation to begin with, much less that something was done to them and that they should like seek some type of justice for that. It can take a really, really long time, and by the time a person is ready to begin taking those steps, it's too late because the statute of limitations is up. So I think there is definitely a case to be made for changing these laws and the ways that they are supposed to work, because in the end, especially in situations like this where you get into the weeds of the whole statute of limitations, it begins feeling as if the perpetrators get off completely scotch-free. Like they have nothing to worry about, because it happened such a long time ago that they basically just have acquired immunity. And when we're talking about really serious cases of abuse, when we're talking about things like human trafficking, right? I think that statute of limitations needs to have a critical look. So this concludes the majority of the articles that I wanted to read. Like I said, most everything focused on this visit to Spain by the Pope and the controversy and fallout surrounding that. Please, by all means, let me know what you think about that. And then I wanted to talk about the school in Croatia and then this Court of Cassation pending decision, because I think they're both pretty significant. This case, of course, being the most significant. So before we close out, I always like to take a moment and acknowledge lives that have passed over the past months, and because usually at least once a month, I will get like an obit or something like that from somebody who passed who is affiliated with one of these organizations. And I think it's important to acknowledge people's passing. And this right here, this is from opusdei.org, like Opus Dei's own website. They published an article remembering three men, Matt, and Val, who tragically lost their lives around a year ago. It's been a little over a year ago now, when they were out recreating, and one of their friends fell in. The other one went in after, like, fell into some rapids, and the other one went after him to try to save him, and he didn't come back. And then the other guy went in after the other two, try to save them, and they all tragically lost their lives. And they just so happened to be members of Opus Dei, which was how it ended up on my radar. And it seems like it was just a very tragic and unfortunately avoidable accident. And it makes me very, very sad. Any loss of human life is very, very sad. And I will use this as an opportunity to remind everybody, especially because we are in peak summer right now, that the great outdoors are not a playground. Especially when you get out into really, really wild and rugged country. It's not a playground. It's not a place that you should go into casually without you doing your due diligence and preparing and letting someone know where you are and having somebody with you. I think that people are so lackadaisical, honestly, about how they approach outdoor recreation, particularly in like more rugged places like where you have rapids and you have cliffs and that kind of thing. It's beautiful, and being in these places is amazing. And I say that as someone who spends a lot of time on America's public lands, camping and hiking and everything else. And it's sad. I see multiple cases every single year of people ending up in really tragic situations, accidents, and deaths that could have been avoided, were completely avoidable. But the people involved, for whatever reason, failed to do their due diligence or to exercise the correct amount of caution or whatever. And now here we are. And I don't say any of this to lay blame on anyone who has passed, because you simply don't know what you don't know. And I think outdoor recreation, a lot of it, especially here in the United States, it's so incredibly accessible. You can like drive through these like really rugged and beautiful like national parks, for example, on like totally paved roads. And I think it can create the idea, this like sort of sense of complacency and comfort in environments where you actually kind of need to be on your toes a little bit and paying attention. And I don't say that to lay blame, because I understand it's easy, like especially culturally, socially, like I don't think people take that kind of thing, outdoor safety, as seriously as they should. And unfortunately, it's the kind of thing you don't think about a lot of the time until it is too late. So eternal rest grant unto these three men. It's so incredibly sad and tragic. They will be missed forever. And it feels like it could have been prevented. So be careful out there, guys. Be careful where you're recreating. Be careful where you go. Tell somebody where you're going if you're going out somewhere remote. Have a time that you're expected to be back. Don't keep secrets about that kind of thing, and be so careful when you are out on like uncertain terrain. Because things can go from like a beautiful day to a perfect nightmare in like matters of seconds. The second obit that I want to read, this was in memoriam of these three men because they passed last year, but I wanted to mention it. These other two individuals have passed here like within the month of June, and I want to mention them. We have, what is her name? Dorothea H. Ulrich, who passed at the age of 97. She was a member of, the reason why this fell on my radar, of the Third Order of the Society of St. Pius X, which has now been declared fully in schism with the Catholic Church now that they've gone ahead with their plan to ordain their own bishops, which I'll have more to say about that in the July newsroom analysis. But I mean, I fully expected that would be the outcome. But anyway, Dorothea landed on my radar because she was a member of this Third Order of the Society of St. Pius X, passed away at the age of 97, lived a very long life. She, from her picture, looks like she was a very sweet lady. Eternal rest right unto her. And then lastly, we have this woman here, Ellen or Ellie Laletta. She was born in 1938 and lived to the ripe age of 87 and passed away. The reason why her obit landed on my radar is because her memorial or funeral is going to be held at the Milas Jesu St. Josaphat Center in Phoenix, Arizona. And if you don't know about Milas Jesu, it's another small Catholic organization, even smaller than like Opus Dei, that unfortunately also kind of devolved into a cult of personality around its founder, who was kind of insane and had substance abuse problems and was abusive and all the rest. And I interviewed a man whose name is David, who got kind of pulled in to this Milas Jesu organization when he was a young man and a recent convert, and he converted to Catholicism because he realized that he was gay, and he was really, really freaked out about it and really uncomfortable with it and didn't see like any type of queer representation in his community or around him. So he really, really wanted to like suppress that, and he turned to trying to like literally pray the gay away. Long story short, it didn't work, and he has a beautiful family now and is just a beautiful human being. And that interview about his experience in Milas Jesu is really, really interesting. So if you haven't seen it, you can go and find it over on my channel. But her memorial will be held at that Milas Jesu Center. That's how I found out about her. Eternal rest grant unto her as well. And that concludes all of the articles for the newsroom analysis. I think this was an interesting month just because of everything that's happening. You know, we had the Pope's visit to Spain and all of the fallout from that, which is obviously very interesting. We have what we can expect is a pending decision from Argentine federal authorities about this case with the 44 former members, which this has been dragging on for years now at this point. That is really, really significant, and I wanted to mention that. And we have that aspect of the like Opus Dei expansion playbook happening with these schools all around the world that are allegedly unaffiliated with Opus Dei, but weirdly carry an awful lot of water for the organization nonetheless. So thank you for your attention to these matters. Please let me know what you think down below. Don't forget, you can read any of these sources for yourself, linked in the source document. If you or someone that you know is in need of mental health support, I have linked a variety of resources in the description. What you exactly need may not be there, but I tried to pull from like all around the world different resources that I found. So maybe there's something there that can get you pointed at least in the right direction. Life is incredibly hard, but we do not have to go at it totally alone or unequipped. There are people and programs that do want to help. So if you need help, please reach out. I also announced in my last video that I have become a HASSL ambassador. HASSL is a social impact brand that is working to reshape the narrative around women's safety, particularly in public if you're interested in learning more about HASSL's work, taking advantage of their free educational resources, or supporting them. I have also linked their information down below as well. Links to connect with me across social media and support my various endeavors all down there too. And that is all that I have for right now, but I'll have a new video for you very, very soon. So in the meantime, just remember, nolite te bastardes carborundorum. Don't let the bastards drag you down.